everybody. Mike, Tim, VOXOLOGY podcast, and you. What a winsome combination that is. We're delighted that you're here. We're still surprised, and we're delighted. And so, Tim, hello, Tim.
Hello, Mike.
Tim's got his fisherman beanie on. He looks like he's just off the boat in Maine from crab fishing over the last couple of days. So, congratulations.
Kind of wish that was true.
Rumor is that you were at a trivia night last night. Can you give us one answer that you got that you nailed for the table?
I actually nailed a couple. It
Yeah?
was so it was a fundraiser for girls flag football, which is now a CIF. Well, that's the league here, like a state sanctioned sport for a couple of years. They don't have a booster thing like the other sports do, and so because it was a fundraiser for girls football, it was themed for like legendary women. So it was like just 30 different questions having to do with women in history, whether it was scientific or pop culture or whatever. So I got the 19th Amendment.
Boom.
Correct.
Boom.
I got
how about habeas corpus?
That wasn't on the wasn't on the question here.
Just checking.
I don't know. It was a bunch of like random things like that you're like,
was
oh,
Madonna?
I can't remember this.
Was Madonna?
There was like 5 questions that were name that tune.
Oh,
which I was in a group with mostly all ladies, and because the first one was like a Celine Dion. She only played like the first 10 seconds of the song, and I was like, I have no idea what this is.
Okay, that's fair.
And there was Mariah Carey, which is also not really in my listening.
No Beyonce, bro?
No, it was
just out of
like
the last concert.
There was one Madonna, there Like a Virgin was played, and then
I'd have crushed that one. I'd have crushed.
Stuff like that, yeah. Madonna's pretty
crushed.
80s Madonna, I love. It's fun, like very well done pop music.
Bonita.
That's right.
Stands for the beautiful man. I don't think that's true. I think it's the beautiful island. But I thought I wanted that to be my nickname in college. No one bought that. Well, among Tim's, dear listener, first of all, we have a website that is brand new if you hadn't heard. So that's awesome. Secondly, Tim and I are going to be in Southern California June 5th for a World Relief conversation with Matthew Sorens called Lean Into the Fire. Fireside chat, lean into the questions. We put it on our socials. You do need to kind of RSVP, and we're super excited about that. Limited room,
free.
You need free,
right? Yep.
Dude. You had me at free. So we're super excited about that, and if you can come, we'll see you there. And then one of Tim's many talents, a website guru, punk rocker. Folk singer, but also meme sender. Uh-oh. So Tim,
out of all the memes I sent you in the last week, I have no idea where this is going.
Yes, and the key phrase is all the memes. Yeah. There is a steady diet of serious, borderline blasphemous, ironic, sarcastic memes that drip into text threads, and whenever I am unfortunate enough to sign on to Instagram, there's usually 40 or so I have to catch up on. But this one got my attention, Tim.
This is how I don't sit with just all the just the darkness by myself. You know?
Yeah. This is I got a text from Tim yesterday saying it was several texts, and it was like, okay, I'm in my feels today, and it was like, yep.
It was true.
But this wasn't set yesterday. But this is from Christian A. Smith. This is your friendly reminder that biblical does not equal moral. Biblical simply means it's found in the Bible. There are many immoral concepts in the Bible. Genocide is biblical. Sexual assault is biblical. Slavery is biblical. None of them are moral. So what Tim will do is he'll just drop that into the chat without any commentary, and then move along with his day while his friends look at this and go, that's really interesting. And so out of that one meme, come 14 pages of notes this week, and I'm up to 10 for next week on what does it mean to be biblical, Tim,
Yeah.
before we start our next little series.
Buckle
But
up.
I've long been opposed to attaching the word biblical to political positions, philosophies of marriage or parenting, masculinity or femininity. And it's always really bugged me because I think that word is really confusing. So I want to make the case that that is an unhelpful word that should disappear from our Christian vocabulary. And so what I want to do is I want to go over like what it means or what it can be used to mean in a bunch of different senses. And then I kind of want to leave us at the end of this episode thinking, how can we ever know? Is it ever even possible to know what the Bible actually says? And then on that cliffhanger, which you know the answer to, at least in our opinion, is yes, you can. We're going to go over a way that the most helpful way I have ever come to think about how it is to understand and read the Bible. And so this is, I mean, it's, I don't even know what to call it. It's revolutionary. It's grandiose. It's delusional. It's one of those. And so anyway, we're going to be kind of exploring this idea of what it is to be biblical and using that sort of meme as a jumping off point. Because, I'm in conversations with Christians, church leaders, the public sphere, and we'll get into controversial topics, and we're trying to have a conversation about what the biblical approach would be to this certain topic, a biblical approach to sexuality, a biblical approach to masculinity, a biblical approach to gender. And then every political season, we have sort of biblical candidates and biblical positions and biblical policies versus unbiblical policies. How can you be a Christian, and believe the Bible and vote this way or that way? So what an appropriate use of biblical, I've got two examples of appropriate uses. One just means something that's in the contents of biblical literature, like the biblical account of creation, the biblical book of Job, those, biblical poetry. That's a very appropriate use of the word biblical. Or sometimes you can talk about the characteristics of the literature of the Bible, like biblical Hebrew, biblical Greek. That's different from, Greek spoken today or Hebrew spoken today. So in that sense, biblical can be, I think, really helpful. It just means sort of pertaining to the Bible, or found in the Bible. But inappropriately, biblical has taken on all sorts of connotations. And I want to go over several of those, some of which are hinted at by the meme lord over here that I'm looking at, dressed as a fisherman.
Layers.
So Richard Beck, who's been known to throw out a controversial thought or two, he defines the way the word biblical is used as a sociological test for how tolerant a community is with an interpretation. So he argues biblical is a word that Christian communities use to describe their hermeneutical strategies. Hermeneutics is just it's a study of the way that you approach the Bible. And so biblical is a word that particular communities use for their strategies about reading the Bible. It's a sociological label. In other words, if my denomination says it's biblical, all of these people have gotten together with tradition over the course of generations and have said, hey, here's sort of the broad fence posts of what orthodoxy turns out to be. And biblical means that it fits within those goalposts. It's if a community gathers to discuss if a view is biblical or not, they are asking how a particular view sits in their hermeneutical history and norms. If the view can be held without rupture of those norms or those relationships or that fellowship, then it's called biblical. If it would cause rupture, then it's called unbiblical. And so he calls it a sociological stress test. If it's biblical, I thought that was really interesting, though. I think that's exactly how some people use the term, can we accept this interpretation without undue rupture of our fellowship? I think that's a very real use of the word biblical. Another scholar, very insightful, said biblical also functions as a branding trademark. So he says, the great things about brands or trademarks is that they give consumers assurance about the quality and consistency of a product. Right? So if I'm buying a BMW, I don't have to know necessarily about BMW or the specific BMW, but it's a BMW. A Lexus. When I go to McDonald's, the promise is that every McDonald's everywhere is going to taste kind of the same way, right? So we've learned in a way, in a world where we're overloaded with consumer choice, we've learned to reduce things down to trademarks and branding, right? So I trust this. So, I mean, you can ask me like, what's your favorite kind of pizza? And I will say, this form of pizza, and that brand, even if I'm somewhere else, I will trust that brand is going to be the kind of pizza I like. I mean, this obviously is how it works. They have social significance. Trademarks do, brands do. So obviously, if I'm driving a Kia versus a BMW, although Kias are great, I'm just saying, like, back when I was growing up, a Kia was not something you would drive as opposed to a Mercedes or a Beamer, as we called it. And trademarks help people identify themselves and find belonging. And so that's how trademarks function. And so this scholar argues the term biblical has come to function as a sort of trademark, performing many of a trademark's purposes. Biblical, and then he has like a little TM next to it, offers people the quality assurance of the trusted Christian brand, relieving people of the uncertainty and anxiety of having to determine the quality of things for themselves. So we have biblical worldviews, biblical parenting, biblical business, biblical politics, biblical leadership, biblical counseling, and numerous other biblical trademark institutions, techniques, ideas, and products. So, not shockingly, in America, biblical functions most often this way. And so, like many trademarks, he says there is a labeling creep as the weight of the trademark is placed behind many products that are quite unworthy of it. But it's kind of like if it says biblical, then it's 100% organic, free range Christianity. So when my local Christian radio station says, hey, we're a Christian radio station, which means we're safe for the whole family, then that means you don't have to think about what it's saying. It just is Christian.
Yeah. They can be less free range and more kind of just processed.
Well, as it turns out, that's exactly what it is. Because and like gospel centered is another with some of our Reformed brothers. With some of our Reformed brothers and sisters, the Gospel Coalition, right? Gospel parenting, gospel church planning, gospel church. It's like, yep. But it functions as almost a branding trademark that allows us to not have to engage in particular discernment. It simplifies a whole complex array of judgments that we are required to make in the direction of a single value choice.
That's it, man. That kicks out the discernment, tells you exactly how to fall. Like, it's just yes. I knew you'd love this, Tim. I knew the mess we're in. We're in.
Tim. Sometimes I'll bring topics to you, and you will yawn and kind of throw up in your mouth. There are other days I will bring topics to you, and you will be like, "Oh yes, this is
what I already got from this." What I already got from this is
what?
A Halloween costume idea, Pee-wee hermeneutics.
Oh my goodness. Tim, if you just take one thing from this and that was it, it's all worth it. If one person hears about Pee-wee hermeneutics and comes to Jesus, that is... See, Halloween's always on the brain, dear listeners. Always on the brain. So what ideologies and like marketing trademarks do is, as long as we're committed to the brand or the value that the brand represents, we don't have to trouble ourselves much with the task of working it out. So my pastor says this isn't biblical, then I'm great. It's not biblical, and I distrust anybody who says that it is. So Biblical can function appropriately as a descriptor for the
Mm-hmm.
kind of things found in the Bible, the kind of content or literature, the languages. Inappropriately can function as a sociological stress test. Our community can tolerate within these norms this view or not, or it can function as kind of a brand label where Christian things markets. We have Christian books, Christian schools, Christian music. Again, Christian and biblical are synonymous here in the
Mm-hmm.
way that they're used. And this third one is a subset of the second one, but biblical also functions in an ideological manner. It's a shorthand term that hides a boatload of assumptions and logical processes that the speaker may not even be aware of. Right. So if I just say something that is, I say something that is biblical, I'm not even aware that I'm packing an entire universe of assumptions into that
Totally. Yeah.
word. So it's not just that it's used for a kind of a marketing reduction of having to think and deal with complexity, but it's also used as a shorthand cover up of all of my ideological assumptions that I bring to a text, right? So if all I have to do, and again, another scholar says this is a word, biblical, that is full of significance for the person who says it, but is often empty of shared meaning in a conversation. Right? When the word biblical comes up in a conversation about moral, social, or political issues, it alerts me anyway that we're headed for confusion and miscommunication. Because we don't, to just say something's biblical allows us, even in the most well-intentioned sense, to just sort of say, I don't have to defend all of the assumptions I'm
Totally.
making.
It's not me. Take it up with God.
Yes. Oh, we'll get to that because that's absolutely one of those. To say something's biblical means that we get to skip out on all of the hard and very frustrating conversations with people who don't agree or from other
Totally.
traditions or whatever. And there are, and often biblical just functions for the things I like in the Bible rather than
Right.
the whole Bible itself. You know what I mean? So
Mm-hmm.
biblical masculinity gets reduced to the version of masculinity that I think is, but it's not dealing with the breadth and the whole width of the teaching or example of masculinity in the text. So in all of these ways, I think it's super ambiguous and not at all helpful. Biblical can also be used in a power over sense, which is what exactly you hinted at. Shocking.
Shocking.
It can either be used to establish bounded sets, right? Which is, we talk about this all the time. A bounded set is a set that's defined by boundaries rather than the center. And so the boundary line becomes the point rather than the individual members' relationship to each other and to the center. And we've done loads of stuff on this, so we won't rehash it, except to say, when somebody gets up and says, you're not arguing with me, take it up with God, which is exactly what you just said. What's being done there is a power over. Biblical there is used for power over. Biblical is used there to justify some sort of leverage given to the user of that phrase, right? It's a position of moral authority, particularly when pastors use it with people who are not particularly well read in the Bible. Man, to just bang away at what's unbiblical about something. And we do too. I mean, we talk about the Bible all the time and try to discern things that are biblical and unbiblical. And so we're going to get into how we escape this. But I want to just first suggest that, like our meme artist, described, the word biblical is really unhelpful, and I want to get rid of it. And I don't want to trust anything that uses it. I don't want to trust anyone that uses it. I don't want to trust any topic that it's affixed to.
Oh, so if you go to our brand spanking new website, this would be a good trial run. Mike's drinking a purple drink. If you go on the website, you can search. So if somebody hasn't listened to the Centered Set conversation,
we have search
I'm
functions.
pretty sure you can just search Centered Set, and then it'll bring up every episode.
I did. I tried.
That has that, and then when you click on the individual episodes, you can pick your choice of where you listen. So it should have a link for
Timestamps.
iTunes or Spotify or whatever, like whatever your
Look at us.
flavor is. But
After
now you
10
can go look it
years.
up. Like, oh, centered set. What's that? Well,
After
go
10
search
years. And by the way, your support is the reason we can finally do like this
Yes.
stuff. And so
and not have ads.
yes. Although, Tim, do you have low T? All right. So
I have lowercase t.
low T, Gombus. What do we call him? All right. Someone
Low t.
may leverage biblical, the word biblical, to signal that his or her opinion on some moral, social, political issue is identical to that of Almighty God. Some use the term to establish their own human authority.
Boom.
To be equal to that of God's authority. So the sort of leader may describe themselves as, hey, we're a biblical church. I'm a biblical pastor. We preach from the Bible. And that's usually in contradistinction to those not biblical Christians or people who think they're Christians, but, they don't agree on whatever Bible point we're talking about. And one of the really bad effects of using biblical in this way is it presents pastors in particular. Scholars are usually, the vast majority of scholars I'm aware of or know personally, are really great at knowing what their lane is. So I'm an expert in the Pauline view of the word head, kephale, and that's it. Like now, as a result, they'll know other things too, but they're really clear on what their lane is. When someone gets a hold of a Bible and thinks that the Bible is the only source of truth, then all of a sudden they have to be an expert on everything. So depression becomes, you need to read your Bible more. Science, I'm an expert on cosmology because I read Genesis. I'm an expert on politics because I've read Romans 13. You get this like inflation of the pastoral like ego that says, well, because I know the Bible and the Bible's the only thing that's true in the world, then therefore I'm an expert on everything that's true in the world.
Or they'll flip it and they'll be like, I'm a Romans 13 Christian. So they'll just take this one particular verse and then use it unbiblically to define themselves. And then if you don't agree, it's like, well, it's in the Bible.
Yep. And then one of this is the most horrible result of that use of biblical to bolster your own authority or define bounded sets, is it just shuts down discussion. It's a lazy way to justify your own ideas without having to justify your own ideas. I mean, all the things. So I think this word is trash.
You heard it here first, folks.
It's not helpful. But I think a lot of us don't mean biblical. When we say biblical, we don't mean it in any of those ways. I think you and I and good-hearted people, not that you and I are good-hearted people, but you and I plus good-hearted people use it to mean something like, hey, this is clearly the Bible's teaching. The gospel, there is a teaching that's there that we think we can apprehend and convey. So often when we use biblical, we just mean this seems to be one of the parts where the Bible is clearest. But even then, we have to exercise a bit of humility because as it turns out, everyone's biblical is different, right? So are Catholics biblical? Presbyterians biblical? Methodists? The Amish? Baptists? Episcopalians? They would all have differing definitions of biblical. Now, there may be, vast for sure. And there may be a lowest common denominator like the Nicene Creed or something that we'd all affirm and go, yep, that's biblical. And that's enough, by the way. But certainly, even if I just sit back and go, man, this is the clear teaching of the Bible. What I mean by that is anybody who approaches the Bible objectively should believe it this way. I've still got to reckon with the fact that my biblical is someone else's heretical, and my heretical is someone else's biblical. And so what do we do with this, right? How should we begin to unravel the Gordian knot of interpretation? So have we done a good enough job beating up on this word, at least in the way it's used?
I think so.
Would you agree? Would you agree? I tried to do my best for you, Tim. Um, so I've talked about the ambiguity of the word biblical. Now I want to talk about the idea that we can just sit back and say, yep, that's the clear teaching of the Bible without appropriate nuance. Now, to be clear, I don't know. I mean, you tell me what you think. I believe the Bible is inspired. I believe the Bible is authoritative. I believe the Bible is I believe it's God's word through human words. I would affirm, I think infallible. I don't know. I don't think that's a helpful word either. I just don't think
what had a huge conversation with a friend was asking me about Apocrypha books. Like, why?
Yeah.
Like some of these books track better than other things with X, Y, and Z, and why wasn't it allowed, and blah, blah, blah. And it's just like every word you just said, like, yeah, I would agree with those words, but I'd put an asterisk on every single one of them. That's like,
yeah,
authoritative asterisk. Here's what that means and how it pertains to different ways to
right.
read this genre or that genre and how you approach them and why and what the intent was. And
I just don't. Yeah, exactly. What I mean when I say authoritative and inspired and whatever is the Bible tells us how it is to be read. Now, that doesn't mean we don't make mistakes then, but it just means that there are three elements that we have to reckon with to come to within the realm of faithful interpretation. One is the text itself, the words that are used, the way the words are put together, the syntax, the genre of literature we're dealing with, the other parts of the Bible that are in conversation with other parts of the Bible. So you have the text. This is from Brandon J. O'Brien, and I think this is what we're going to get into next week. Then you have what's behind the text, and that is the worldview assumptions that aren't explicitly stated by Paul. So when Paul says, head coverings, let's talk about head coverings. Man, you dishonor your head, and women, you dishonor your head, and hey, because of the angels. And you're like, okay, so he's channeling a whole symbolic world there that we have no clue about. When we did our Genesis series or Revelation series, there are cultural assumptions that are sitting there because the Bible is written within the stream of human history. There are cultural conversations that the Bible is in dialogue with that we don't have in front of us. Yeah. So when Genesis is writing a creation account, there are other ancient Near Eastern creation accounts and it's very fruitful to look at those and see what's similar and what's different. And so, but you don't know that automatically. I never knew that. I never knew that there were other creation accounts. Never. Until I was seminary and went, oh, there are other creation accounts. Not only that, there's overlap. There are other flood stories. And instead of being threatening, that to me,
threatening is the thing. Yep.
It highlights the beauty and the uniqueness of the text. But it's just recognizing that there's something behind the text. The text isn't coming to us hermeneutically sealed in a historic, in a package that is not connected to history or language or cultural study. And then the third part of that whole equation is what's in front of the text, namely me, and all of the unwritten, unspoken assumptions I carry into the Bible.
Yeah. So you have the assumptions and everything from the writer, and the time period and the context, and then
I have mine.
And then all of yours.
Yes. So what biblical means is an awareness of the way the text is functioning, what's behind it as far as we can tell. I was going to say discern, tell, and what's in front of it in terms of in my brain. Exactly. So I want to explore that even the clear teaching of the Bible, that phrase, I want to beat up a little bit on that phrase in the same way we beat up on
you don't have to do
biblical.
A little bit. Let's just go
so biblical,
elbow drop it.
Biblical, well, because I do think there is some clear teaching. I really do. But how you discern what's the clear teaching and what's not has to respect the three parts, the text in front of the text, behind the text.
Totally.
So let's talk about when somebody says the clear teaching of the Bible. And this is what, when somebody will say, I mean, there's no, like, if biblical marriage can mean polygamy or sexual assault or whatever, because it's found in the Bible. Right. You and I would say, like, there's a lot that's found in the Bible that isn't approved of by the Bible. And so, yeah, what the Bible describes isn't like, it isn't a record of what God is approving of. The
See,
Bible
I
and
learned
often,
this so late in life, like
it would have
the
been helpful, right?
descriptive,
Earlier.
prescriptive, all that kind of stuff. Like, yeah, because you'd get in those debates with friends when you're young about like what, like why did God like blah
Yeah.
blah blah and blah blah blah. And I'm like, I don't, I don't, but
Yep.
being able to parse through the nuance of what is in those categories exactly is
Totally.
monumental. In
That, and so this is where we want to start saying, okay, so let's take the phrase clear teaching of the Bible
yeah,
and say, okay, well, even then, we have to distinguish between an example that might be in the Bible versus something that it's explicitly commanded and approved of by God.
mm-hmm.
Even then, you have all sorts of accommodation going on. So God will
Mm-hmm.
give, God clearly, see, there it is, clearly seems to indicate in Genesis 1 and 2 that it was kind of a husband, a wife, and a covenant. But in Genesis 4, we've got multiple wives. And so in
Mm-hmm.
Exodus, we get a command about taking care of multiple wives. Is that something God approved of, or is that an accommodation? Divorce. Jesus says, no, God was accommodating you guys. Are you kidding me? This was never. So all of a sudden, you've opened up a realm of Bible where it's like, oh, so when we read about dashing infants against the rocks
Yeah.
at the end of one of the Psalms, we're not hearing God approved language here. We're hearing God approved recordings of human speech to God
Mm-hmm.
that include horribleness
Horrible things.
against
Yeah.
their enemies. Yeah, exactly. And so Jesus will come along and say, hey, you've heard it said, but I'm telling you.
Yeah.
So I know you love this stuff so much. So the first point we want to make when people use the phrase clear teaching of the Bible, even then we have to distinguish between what the Bible records versus what the Bible approves. Because there is a whole bunch that's in the Bible that is awful.
Yeah.
Secondly, often biblical in the sense of, so I tried to beat up on inappropriate uses of biblical. Then I'm saying, but we mean when we say biblical, the clear teaching of the Bible. And now I'm trying to put a little haze on that by saying, well, you still have to distinguish between prescriptive and descriptive. And often the clear teaching of the Bible, even that phrase implies a uniformity that's not always present around the subject in Scripture.
Yeah.
So I've had people say, hey, there's a real clear teaching on marriage here. And it sounds like there is a single uniform teaching on the topic. And then you go into the Bible and it is a mess. It is an absolute mess. Some of the marriages are romantic. Some are property.
A lot.
Some are for political alliance. There's so much patriarchy in the midst of them that we would never sanction those sorts of things. Or how about Jacob working 14 years for a wife after he's disappointed with wife number one, and he gets, I hope I said wife and not knife, after he's disappointed with wife number one, right? There are marriages in the Bible that include multiple women and adultery and sexual assault and the chopping up of concubines to
Which you'll
make
hear
a
a lot of
prophetic
like
point.
non-Christians bring up to be like, oh, what's your
Yes!
biblical version of marriage again? Like,
Yes. And again, there we would say there's a difference between what the Bible records. The Bible, one of the reasons I actually trust the Bible and find it inspiring is it doesn't flinch on any of its heroes. Its heroes are idiots, except for Jesus, which means there's place for me. Paul even talks about this weird thing about, I don't even know if there'll be marriage in heaven. In Ephesians, we were just looking at the church I'm part of, the household codes and how confusing those are. And you can't generate like a clear definition of biblical masculinity, femininity, or marriage from that. So, or if you want to say, well, biblical marriage means if my brother's wife, if my brother dies, I have to marry his wife and impregnate her so my brother's line lives on. That's the law of levirate marriage, right? So that's just not, there's so much nuance. And so often clear teaching of the Bible implies a uniformity that just isn't present in the text. And then the clear teaching of the Bible can also imply that that can be used to elevate minority voices that are really that are based on controversial passages and ignore the much clearer passages. So like 7-day creation. That's the clear teaching of the Bible, right? Is how this is used this way. And so you take, or the millennium, or the rapture, clear teachings of the Bible that elevate tiny pieces that seem clear in their tiny piecedness, but when you put them together and go in front of the text, behind the text, the whole thing, you realize, oh, they're not meaning that at all.
Mm-hmm.
But the clear teaching of the Bible is, hey, here's this verse out of Thessalonians, here's a verse out of Matthew, clear teaching of the Bible. And if you take those two separate from the rest of context, I see how you get there.
Yeah.
But they're not clear when they're placed back in the menagerie of, the full picture. And this is part of how, we did a whole Bible series, and one of the big topics was accommodation, right? That the revelation of God progresses. And so it's triage. And then here comes Jesus saying, listen, the command to like eye for eye and tooth for tooth, that was triage. But I'm telling you that the righteousness of God is actually loving and forgiving.
Yeah.
Divorce, triage. But I'm telling you, anyone who divorces, they're causing the other to be in adultery. Like, whoa. So even Jesus himself has a hermeneutic that's far more complex than the Bible is super clear on this. So is there hope, Timothy? So we've tried to beat up on the idea of biblical and all the ways it's misused. And we've tried to beat up on the idea of, hey, this is just a clear teaching of the Bible. And recognizing, well, I mean, yeah, okay, maybe. But is there hope? And I want to say unequivocally, yes. The fact that there's a plurality of interpretations doesn't mean that some aren't more faithful than others. That's a huge, huge point. The fact that there's confusion or diversity of opinion doesn't mean that God hasn't communicated clearly. Right. We shouldn't be shocked that there is a diversity of opinion around the Bible for two reasons. Number one, because of us and our frailty, and number two, because of the nature of the Bible itself. So let's talk about each of those in turn. All right. So we've talked about beating up on biblical. Well, what if biblical means clear teaching of the Bible? Well, even that's a bit hazy. Is there hope? Utterly, there's hope. Absolutely. And we shouldn't be put off by the fact that there are loads of interpretations. There are two reasons for that. One is us and our maturity, and then the other is like the nature of the way the Bible comes to us. So let's deal with both of those to just assure the fact that there are so many interpretations doesn't mean that they're all equally valid. That doesn't mean that at all. I'm going to read an extended quote that is the most challenging quote, one of the most challenging quotes I've ever read in my life, but I think it's 100% true. And it's from Stanley Hauerwas. And in it, he argues that we should take the Bible away from individual American Christians.
Oh.
And oh, it's so good. It's so good. So let me get a drink of purple drink. I played pickleball this morning, Timothy, so I'm a little parched.
Yeah.
Got my electrolytes coming in.
Just drinking my coffee out of my slaughtered lamb mug.
Oh my Lord, is that a band?
Nope, that's from American Werewolf in London. That's the bar they go to.
Oh, that's so funny. Okay, bro. Buckle up, as you say.
Buckle up. One of the worst Pearl Jam songs.
Buckle up. Yeah.
You can't even remember it. That's how bad it is.
Yeah. Or Stupid Mop. Take that. All right. Is that what it was called, Stupid Mop? I threw it out there like I knew it. I think that's what it's
Stupid
called.
Mop. Yeah, it goes on, but
it does. All right. So from Stanley, I'm going to read this nice and slow. It's so juicy. Most North American Christians assume that they have a right, if not an obligation, to read the Bible. I challenge that assumption. No task is more important than for the church to take the Bible out of the hands of individual Christians in North America. Let us no longer, right? I'm going to say that again. No task is more important than for the church to take the Bible out of the hands of individual Christians in North America. Let us no longer give the Bible to all children when they enter the third grade or whenever their assumed rise to Christian maturity is marked, such as eighth grade commencements. Let us rather tell them and their parents that they are possessed by habits far too corrupt for them to be encouraged to read the Bible on their own. To suggest that the Bible should be taken away from North American Christians will strike many as absurd. They may assume that I am not serious. Is it not the very hallmark of Christianity, particularly Protestant Christianity, to encourage people to read the Bible? I certainly believe that God uses the scripture to help keep the church faithful. But I do not believe in the church's current circumstance that each person in the church thereby is given the right to interpret the scripture. The Reformation doctrine of sola scriptura, joined to the invention of the printing press and underwritten by the democratic trust in the intelligence of the common person, has created a situation that now makes people believe that they can read the Bible, quote, on their own. That presumption must be challenged, and that is why scripture should be taken away from Christians in North America. I'm not aware that this suggestion cannot help appearing authoritarian and elitist. I am not, however, particularly bothered by such characterizations because I am challenging the very presumption that communities can exist without authority.
Oof.
So now he goes on to make this argument, all right? And this is the point of that quote. American
is this
Christians,
old quote? What's the time frame?
This is in the 90s.
Okay.
And it's more true now.
Yeah.
And I know, I get it. I mean, he's right. It sounds ridiculous, right? Because this is what the Reformation was designed to correct, right? Is getting like the common language and getting the Bible into the hands of ordinary people. But he's making a point here. Don't get hung up on like Denny Burke and very others when they saw this quote floating around. I mean, they just had conniptions. But the point he's making is really profound, and it's this point. North American Christians are trained to believe that they are capable of reading the Bible without spiritual and moral transformation. In other words, in the hands of people who have not been formed by the Bible becomes the Torah of death. It becomes biblical as a marketing tool, becomes biblical as an expression of power over, becomes biblical as a justifier of arguments and a closer of conversation. And so the argument he makes in the book, which I went out and bought instantly, is we have to sit and be formed by the text in community before we're trustworthy with the text on our own.
Yeah.
Bro, I got to say, I know it sounds nuts, but I totally agree with that. I don't think it sounds nuts
because what's the alternative? The alternative is
what we got.
Yeah, and so think about that. Like we just need to get the Bible into people's hands. It turns into a magic. It's like a talisman. It's like it becomes a magical token that you're like, hey, all we need to do is just get it to people. And once people have it, well, it'll do the work on its own.
That's it.
And it's like, oh, well, now we see where we are.
Now we see where we are. I love it. And so I just wanted to highlight some of the deficiencies in Mike Erie that need to be remedied by the formation of the text in community before Mike Erie is trustworthy to be a Bible interpreter. And that's why, like, I don't just sit and read the Bible and go, hey, what do I think this means to me? I read in a wide array of witnesses, both current and historical.
But that's how we were brought up, right? Quiet time.
Totally. My quiet time.
It'll speak to you in the way that it needs to. And
yep. So Mike Erie, let's talk about all the ways that Mike Erie is corrupt even with the formation in community. So spiritually immature. Paul will talk about he'll use meat and solid food versus milk and infant's food. And in a lot of ways, I still find myself, and I'm sure people experience me as very spiritually immature. Secondly, I'm totally captivated and corrupted by individualism. I am always the hero of the story, the biblical story, and the Bible verse always applies to me. So I'm a narcissist when it comes to the text. It's always about me, my life, my improvement, my blessing. It's never meant to challenge or provoke. It's always meant to sort of bless and encourage. My limited exposure or knowledge of the whole body of the biblical text. I'm woefully underread in like the prophets. And so whenever I get into like Jesus's words that are quoting Isaiah, I've got to do all this extra work to go back to Isaiah and go, oh, what's Isaiah doing here? And how would Jesus have used that or not use that?
Right.
Now, I'm listing all of these with me as the object, but I need you to know secretly, you are the object, dear listener, because I want us to be humbled afresh. Because when we come to the Bible and we say, oh man, all these interpretations, the problem must lie with God. I just want to say I have more skepticism towards my ability to understand than I do towards God's like willingness to communicate. So spiritual maturity, individualism, limited exposure to the whole body of the biblical text. For many years, I just didn't even know anything about hermeneutics. I just thought if you read the text and like you circled the repeated words and those are all great steps, man, let's do those. But I was aware of like the assumption I was bringing to the text that felt like very relativistic and liberal. To be aware of my own social location so that when I approach a text that talks about famine, I ignore famine. But when there's a pastor that wrote a book called What Do They Hear? He did a study where people from Western worlds would read the story of the prodigal son where there was a famine. And I think it was Prodigal Son. It may have been a different story. I don't know. But famine was mentioned. Americans never paid any attention to famine. But when he taught it to Russians, they all noticed the backstory was a famine. And it was just he's just interesting because what's in front of us and the text causes us to choose what to focus on. Who are the heroes? Who are the villains? Like it just like all of that sits there. And so if I'm not aware of those sorts of things, then often I'm just sitting by myself and interpreting according to my own predetermined biases or political leanings or whatever. Laziness. I just don't want to take the time to do all the study. It sounds like a pain in the butt. Here are guys like Mike and Tim who do study, or Tim Mackey, or whoever. Shouldn't we just listen to them? We pay them to do the work. And there's something that's true to that, right? I mean, I do trust guys like Tim Mackey or our friend Bethany, who's a pastor, Susie, who's a pastor. Like these people do really hard work. But there is a sense that, man, I was told you should just be able to open it up and feel encouraged. That's what I was told. Inattentiveness in the age of distraction to sit down and actually read a whole book of the Bible, shocking at once. This is one, Tim, that you've expressed, feeling overwhelmed by all of the mess. Like, how can you even know? How do you even tell? Just feeling like overwhelmed. I don't know Greek. I don't know Hebrew. I don't know who to trust. It's just easier to like, I barely know English. Being unaware of my biases and assumptions. Pride or hardness of heart. This is one Jesus talks a lot about, where the Pharisees know the text, but they don't know what's behind the text or the assumptions they're bringing to the text. And so he will say that they're blind guides or they have hardness of heart. And so ultimately, I want to have a healthy skepticism towards my ability to hear well, rather than just always put it on, well, God, if God really wanted me to know this, he would have been much clearer, with that, because that's what I want to say.
And I have said, I don't know how many times.
Yeah.
God would just send me an email on this topic that.
Yes. But instead he gave you basic instructions before leaving Earth. Oh, and then this will be the last point. My goodness, I still have so many more notes. And I don't know how to express this well, but I suspect there's something to it. The nature of communication between real free persons demands the possibility of misunderstanding. In other words, God could coerce understanding, but then we would no longer be image bearers. So the fact that we're image bearers, the fact that God actualizes a Genesis 1 and 2 universe, and he gives instructions that said, hey, don't eat from that tree, eat from all the rest of the tree, and that those instructions were doubted, or some would even argue misunderstood. because God actualizes that kind of universe where he respects the dignity and freedom of his creation, then whatever communication God has to his people always by definition has to leave room for misinterpretation. He can't coerce belief. Oh, Tim's thinking. Now, the counter that I would hear to that often, and I've thought myself as well, if my eternal damnation to hell is based upon my understanding this ancient text, then you'd think God would have been a little clearer.
Yeah.
I've since come to question that assumption. And so I don't have that same reaction to the goal isn't to understand the text. The goal is for the text to form a certain kind of community.
But man, how much did you get shamed with that? Or like made afraid in your upbringing based on and then just like, yeah.
Yep. Exactly. So I want to be, so the nature of the Bible. So first of all, I want to be really skeptical about my ability to read it objectively and hear it for what it really says. Number two, even if I overcame that ability, the fact that I could misunderstand is baked in to the moral universe that God created by definition with autonomous moral beings, right? He could have coerced and didn't.
Can we park on that for a second?
Dude, that's a huge point.
That's huge.
Let's park.
So when we were talking about the Apocrypha stuff the other night, it obviously that path led into errancy conversations, right? Like a group of men putting this thing together and finding what they felt was the most congruent, blah, blah, blah. So that always leads to big questions with people as they're starting to dig at it. Like, well, how, like, what? We're just trusting that this particular group of men were able to do this correctly and blah, blah, blah. But I always come back to that thing that you just said of like the errancy, or however you want to frame that word, seems to be, or the inerrancy of it seems to be a key feature of it. So what you were just saying, like the room for not dictating, like if it was a really rule based, like you have to hit these boxes or else you're screwed.
Yeah.
And God was loving, then you'd think that God would have given us revised versions of the Bible over, like, okay, you guys didn't get this, I'm going to make it more clear. Right. No, you still didn't get this, I'm going to make it more clear.
And he does that in the text at times.
Yeah, but you know what I mean? Like as we've confused it or distorted it or whatever, like those golden tablets would have fallen from the sky on like hey, it's been 7 years, guys. Here comes the new update. But it's not like that. Right? So because of that, like inerrancy, or however you want to phrase that word, or concept.
Inerrancy just means the possibility of it being wrong.
Right, but we live or die on that. Right. The Bible, there's nothing wrong in the Bible. Well, then you have to define what that means by wrong and all that kind of stuff. So it's like that has to be part of the puzzle. Because otherwise, God would have done it, I would assume, dramatically differently if the stakes were that high on misinterpretation and that kind of stuff.
For sure.
The stakes are high, but I don't think they're high in the way that we just did in such a simplistic, silly manner. And it seems to be that it's not that we're having that conversation incorrectly. We're just not having the right conversation at all.
That's it.
And so we've approached it.
That's it.
Wrong.
We think, and because of what's in front of the text, what's in our brains,
in front of the text and behind us, and everything else that you just went through is all, we're all carrying like a little wagon behind us, and a certain type of prescription lenses on our eyes, and someone who's dictating where to look.
But the exact wrong conclusion to draw from this is, well, we can't know, and it must not be important.
Yeah, so that's what I mean. Like we give it that it's an A or B,
totally
binary, and it's like maybe it's not even an alphabetical thing; it's something else entirely.
Yes,
like the word we keep trying to approach it just one of two ways,
right? And
instead, it seems like it's something completely different, and it's all those things you just like. It's the nuance, it's the blah blah blah, it's all these different things. But can you say again the last thing you said about like God not coercing?
Well, I'm thinking of when we did the Bible series, we talked about how the fact that God inspired the Bible in the same way God did everything else. So God actuates free creatures, and he says, name the animals. Now, again, don't know, is that a parable? Is that whatever?
Sure.
Don't care. Don't even care.
Yeah.
What it says in the text, though, is that because God had just been naming things, that the human now was, what part of imaging God meant is that the human was now imitating in a faint way what God was doing with the universe. Now he's doing with the animals. Huge point.
Love it.
And then when you start getting into how the Bible came together, so Moses, hey, Moses, write this down because I want you to remember this story, right? Or Jeremiah wrote this scroll down. It was burned because one of the kings, and so Jeremiah and an aide rewrote that scroll and added some things. Paul will have all of these statements where it's like, hey, bro, can you bring my cloak? You know, if you come visit me during the winter, and remember to give these parchments to so-and-so and tell so-and-so hello. Like the whole incarnation nature of God, the incarnate nature of God, that God speaks to humans through humans, necessitates the fact that it's going to be messy.
Yeah.
So we're not shocked that the Bible's messy because it was written to humans through humans. So even though that there is a plurality of biblical texts, but there is, and there really is, I think, a unified story that undergirds them. And the importance in understanding the unity of the Bible is to understand how all of the tensions present within the Bible sit together.
Mm-hmm.
So you have places in the Bible where it seems like God is controlling every single thing that happens on the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have places where it seems like Satan is controlling everything that happens on earth. And then you have places where it's clear the humans are the ones who've screwed this thing up. And you're like, if you let go of any of those strands, right, you've ceased telling the full story.
Yeah.
And so the unity of the Bible comes from keeping all of those voices in tension with each other. And so there's a humility that comes with that. Because I would say, listen, there is a really clear through line, and it's God dwelling with people. It's God forming a human community to image him. That's how it begins. That's how it ends. That was the purpose of Israel. That's the purpose of Jesus. That's the purpose of the church. There's the story. That whole thing is called the kingdom of God. Now, there are other people who can give other unifying. So there's more than one way to unify the biblical story. My point, though, is where we can feel the most confident is in the unity of the Bible, not necessarily because we're disturbed by the plurality of it. But we only know if we're dealing with biblical unity when we're holding the plurality in tension with each other. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And so I think that's such an important point that you bring up, where it's like there are minority voices in the Bible who are like, I mean, Job dismantles so much of ancient thinking. And then you have like protest literature against Yahweh. And I was reading one scholar, and I cannot wait. I think we might do Lamentations for our church in the fall. But he was saying the Hebrew Bible is the only religious institution that had a God-ordained role of criticism that reflected to God's people. You know what I mean? Like, I was like, wow, that's really great.
Yeah.
And that was always an outsider minority voice. And so when we hold that whole pack of tension and ambiguity and mystery together, I think we're onto something.
100%. I totally agree. That's been a later life thing for me, as I said earlier, and it's just, but I've been finding so much comfort in the fact that the mystery is so important, and that my curiosity is so important.
That's right. And if the Bible, one of the ways I try to discern faithful readings of the text is if the Bible never disrupts. Hey, so the Bible teaches pacifism. Oh, but then here's Ananias and Sapphira dying, and here's God, dealing with Jericho or whatever. If the Bible never disrupts us, never makes us uncomfortable, then we've missed it along the way.
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, Jesus, if our Christianity never challenges us, I mean, Jesus deconstructed the Judaism, a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it of his day. And that, I don't mean the Judaism as like the religious belief system. I mean the institutions that were corrupt and the people's trust in those institutions. And so, my goodness, if Jesus isn't deconstructing us, then there's no way we're hearing it right.
Yeah. Yep.
So I do think, I mean, we've spent 10 years talking about the Bible. I do think there are things, right, to know and to walk in, and there's a unified beauty to this thing that we've explored so much. But you only discern that if you're willing to fight through that initial like line of biblical.
Yeah. Well, how long
or
have you been
not
teaching the
biblical.
Bible? Period. 30.
Right. I started when I was 4, 30 years, totally.
But
And
you know what
it's
I
still-
mean? Like, are you still? It's still
Oh.
revealing and challenging and doing. And you are someone who spends a lot of time in it.
Dude,
And
I am the biggest neophyte in the history of the world.
but that's
like-
what I
like-
mean. As like even for a lay person who doesn't know how to approach the Bible, I think it's encouraging that people like you who have spent
Oh, bro,
a lot
I'm
of time.
nothing. No.
No,
It's when people like Gombus or Scott McKnight or Cynthia
anybody,
Westfall
but anyone who
or-
is in a position of teaching that shows the humility of like, you know what, I just learned something new. I was
Oh my
wrong
goodness.
about
Yeah.
X, Y, and Z, and I've never found anything more encouraging than people in any position of leadership or whatever to say, "Oh, I was wrong," and I'm so excited that I was wrong because what I just learned is so much bigger and better than what I had previously held. I think that's the most encouraging leadership trait.
Yeah, I do.
Just being
I
able
agree.
to do
I
that.
agree. Those are the only kind of teachers I listen to and read.
That's the limp.
That's the limp, bro. That's the limp. All of that. We should be sitting with a big bowl of humble yet expectant cake.
Yeah.
A bowl of cake.
A bowl of cake, he says.
Yep. And on that metaphor, we will close. So next week we'll talk about text, front of the text, behind the text.
It's funny. We were at the Auburn Wellness Committee thing the other night. And I was talking to a friend about when I get really anxious in group settings, I will find myself almost like saying, "Let's close in prayer."
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, very, very secular things or whatever. You just like get anxious. You're like, "This needs to end."
Yeah.
Here we go. I'm
Yeah,
going to
yeah.
say,
Yeah. Seth Erie?
Yeah.
Oh, Seth Erie. Let's do Shema, bro. Come on, baby.
Okay, let's do it.
Let's do it. You were sitting up there so nice, son.
Yes.
Man, and Seth has just he has a great summer haircut. So that's like, if there's a reason to go to YouTube, it's for this haircut, man. He's got a hard part on one side, got a fade on the other side.
Yeah.
He's
"Oh
what would you-
yeah."
Oh, look at that. Look at that. Get that head in there, Seth. We need to see you. There it is. Oh, look. He's got our website pulled up, or is that our YouTube channel?
Yes.
I know. I think a lot of our listens come from Seth Erie.
Yeah.
Okay, so come here.
All right.
All right, put that in your ear, son.
All right.
Are we going to do Shema?
I guess there's a fuck. I'll say package first.
Okay, so if you're on YouTube, he's showing us the YouTube page.
So, if I would say thank you so much to my sweet iPad.
My sweet iPad, thank you.
Sent me my OS from my iPad by Fox. RC package.
Yep, your iPad sends you
It's
VOXOLOgy.
not. Get it bumps up, and get it bumps down. It's not.
Yeah.
And then I have you, and it's okay.
Yeah, it is. It's okay. Thumbs up or thumbs down, it's okay. It's absolutely okay.
I love it.
Yes. And
Thumbs up, thumbs down.
Yeah, it's all okay.
Yeah.
okay.
And who are we going to go see in concert in August?
A concert in August with The Heavy is the Crown.
Heavy is the Crown, which is the name of one of Linkin Park's songs. So we're going to go see Linkin Park.
Yes.
That's Nationwide Arena's in Columbus. This is Bridgestone Arena. So
yes.
boom. And do you want earplugs, son?
Huh?
Do you want earplugs for your ears?
Impacts? No.
For the why?
Because I love loud.
I love loud.
Yeah.
Attaboy.
Yes.
Attaboy. All right, let's do the Shema. Hit it. Hit it, bro. Okay. Well,
Just don't unplug it.
Yeah.
don't plug it. Yeah, don't plug it. Okay, do it.
Shema Israel, Emmanuel, Emmanuel, God, He is here, and Lord God, and everyone, and every God of the heart, soul, mind, and
On that note, friends, we'll see you. Let's close in prayer.
Thank you for listening to this conversation. The VOXOLOGY podcast is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that is made possible by listeners just like you. If you'd like to partner with us, you can do so at patreon.com/VOXOLOGY podcast or on Tithely, tithe.ly, and just search VOXOLOGY podcast. Links for both are in the show notes and on our website. You can interact with the hosts on Facebook /VOXOLOGY podcast or on Instagram at VOXOLOGY podcast and on Twitter or X, whatever it is, at Mike Erie. Thank you for walking this long road with us.